Well, let's officially get started here. And again, welcome. It's great to have you here. And for today, we're going to look at the impact of fatigue on athlete mental and physical performance. It's great to have one of our partners, Mark DeCristofaro from PLL Sports. And this is a content piece that actually Mark and I have been talking about for a few months. We've had some really nice discussions in regards to this area of fatigue. I think we've all experienced it in athletics, outside of athletics, in regards to our current lives. But it's actually an area that not a lot of people have studied. And because not a lot of people have studied this area, there aren't a lot of support recommendations for athletes or people working with athletes. So this is a timely one. And I'm pretty sure that we'll have additional ones along the way. Some of the formal pieces in regard today for our agenda. We'll go through introductions really quickly, Mark and I. We're going to talk about what is fatigue, and we'll start off with mental fatigue. We'll talk about how it impacts performance. Mark has a case study. He'll go through with it. So he'll have a specific case in regards to the impact of performance. We'll talk a little bit about how do we assess it. And then towards the end, we'll talk about support. And then we'll wrap up. And if you have any questions, please let us know. But as mentioned before we got started, please have the questions coming throughout the entire time that we are together. A little introduction about myself and my colleague at HeadSet. So my name is Peter Papadogenis, co-founder with Jason Galea. I'm out of Toronto. Jay's out of San Diego. We started this company a few years ago now. Now we're about 6 years into it. And we're both practicing sports psychs. As mentioned, I'm in Canada, he's in the US, but we wanted to create a platform on mental skills training that was accessible to athletes. So we started HeadSet, as mentioned, about 6 years ago. Data-driven, machine learning is a part of it, and it's accessible. And we focus more so on 5 pillars of mental skills training. So we go through confidence, resilience, motivation, awareness, regulating or handling performance under pressure, right? So those are our 5 main ones, but we deal with all different kinds of different mental strength or mental skill areas for development. Individuals or groups come to us, and once again, it's something that's near and dear to us and a part of our conversation today. As mentioned at the top, we are so happy to have one of our partners, Mark DeCristofaro, from PLL Sports. Mark, I'll send this over to you quickly if you want to do a quick introduction before we officially get started on the content.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete and Jason. So thanks for having us. PLL Sports, we have a few different divisions within our company. We run a high performance center here in Toronto. We have an outsourced sports science division, which I'll get into a bit when we have our conversation. And then what really started the company was performance software. So that started with teams in the NFL. We're now across all major sports leagues, including college, where our software runs their performance department, whether it's managing the daily salary cap or contract negotiations, right down to medical inputs that have to go back to the league, or managing their workload and strength and conditioning. Our side of it, we kind of combined this outsourced sports science, came out of that performance software where we started talking to teams that it was really just a cost factor. They couldn't afford to pay for the software, the customization, or the assets that were needed to go along with measuring those metrics. And so we started a division about 5 years ago now where we wrote an out-of-the-box software. We have a performance staff that manages all the analytics from our side. And if needed, we have the assets, the GPS or the heart rate monitors that come included in any one of our packages. So we work with teams right across North America and Europe. We work with prep schools, college, junior colleges, semi-pro teams. We've just taken on our first national team, and that's really all based on that outsourced sports performance. And really the easiest way to understand it is we fill in the gaps in those programs that they have. So we're not really replacing anybody. We just help them take down the pillars between all the different groups: medical, strength and conditioning, coach, and allow them to see their team in a different light. So that's really what we do.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And then just to add to our connection, so there have been opportunities where PRL and HeadSet have worked together, and Mark's going to talk about one of these. So it's that connection between the physical data and the mental data, and not a lot of groups do this, right? Trying to connect both of those. So once again, this is a great opportunity for us, and we've connected along the way with different projects. And this is one that, Mark, you and I have had conversations, especially the last few months, and it really stems from the individuals and groups, athletes that PRL works with, and then also the HeadSet piece, but also JNI in regards to our private practice. So we're seeing a lot more athletes who are telling us that they are feeling tired, fatigued, mentally, physically, and it really is a sign of the times, right? And we'll get into some of the causes. But just a general kind of outlook in regards to mental fatigue. So it is a psychobiological state in which the athlete will indicate that they're feeling tired, right? In regards to their current state, and it impacts performance. That's really important as well. We have that psychobiological condition. We have the subjective feelings of impact in regards to their performance. At the very bottom, I put it here in red, and hopefully you can see it, that subjective feeling that athletes often talk about is that I can't do it. Like, I'm feeling too tired, or I don't feel good doing it. And then there's a motivational piece that, it's not worth it because they are feeling a certain way, right? And there's different ways in which athletes will kind of talk about their subjective feelings of fatigue. Research shows that it does affect performance. It generally affects performance in a negative way. Some of the research decreases performance, motivation-wise. They become disengaged, the athlete. They become withdrawn. Their concentration, attention, decision-making, it becomes decreased, right? And because we don't know a lot, it's very hard to be able to understand how to help. So this is a starting point in regards to that conversation together. There are many different reasons why athletes feel this mental fatigue or physical fatigue. In parentheses here, it's also very important that everyone experiences differently. For some, it's just acute, right? It's one thing that happens during their day, and then they feel this fatigue. For others, it's a cumulative effect. So some of the examples that are here that have dashes between them, maybe it's a repetitive task, happens day after day. It could be someone who has a training or competition schedule that is weekend after weekend. In regards to some of the athletes that I'm talking to this summer that I have as clients, individual clients, they're going to various competitions and they're gone for weeks at a time. And you kind of hear them towards the end of their travels that they're just depleted. It could be a lack of sleep. A lot of athletes have media engagements. They are on their phone quite a bit in their social media component. They are sort of this commodity or their own brand. But a lot of these athletes, they are student athletes. Outside of their studies, they may be working on top of this full load that they have as athletes as they train and compete. The final couple pieces before bringing it over to Mark once again and going through this case study of ours is the distinction between burnout and mental fatigue. I think a lot of people kind of talk about it as burnout versus this mental fatigue part. And I think it's really important. And I hope this graphic is helpful as well. The mental burnout piece that a lot of people will mention is more chronic and damaging. And it's almost, if you can, and my cursor is going to go over it, so hopefully you see it, it's towards the right-hand side, right? So that is the burnout piece, where the fatigue part would be on the continuum more towards the left-hand side. And this image is from the Canadian Center for Mental Health and Sport. They're out in Ottawa in Canada. And I love this graphic in regards to mental performance and mental health and linking it to mental fatigue that we will go through this entire continuum. We want to start on this left-hand side because that's your mental health. You're at your optimal, right? Good sleep patterns, high energy, normal mood and emotions, high engagement. We're there at times, and sometimes we get out of that healthy component. And this is where with the reacting piece comes that mental fatigue, right? You might have low energy at times, reduced concentration, inconsistent performances. There may be some withdrawal, reduced social activity. But what's really important is what we want to do with mental fatigue with its awareness, understanding, and then support. We want to keep it here, and then we want to bring it back to the healthy part. When it's not understood, when it's not helped out, then we start going to this part of the continuum, the injured athlete, where it's more persistent in the negative symptoms and characteristics. And then when we do not treat it or do not get help, then it becomes excessive. It becomes damaging. It's significant impairment, right? So when you talk about some of the clinical issues, when you're in the ill section for mental health, that's more the clinical, the major depression, the anxiety disorders, right? So once again, I think this is helpful to remember and to put forward, but really that mental fatigue is here. We want to keep it and then be able to treat it and move it forward to have more of this. Last pieces for me is in the assessment. Because we don't know a lot of mental fatigue and fatigue in general, the assessments are very important. We want to have reliable and valid assessments for both of those. For the mental fatigue part, they could be general or they could be narrow. So at the top here is just a general mental fatigue score. You might ask an athlete or an athlete group and say, well, how are you feeling with fatigue? And you could have a scale from 0 to 100. It could be 1 to 10, but on one side, you have none at all, right? You have that optimal mental performance part. The 100 or the other side or the 10 is its maximum, right? It's kind of that ill part of the previous PowerPoint slide, but it's just in general. And then the athlete has to pick and choose based on that. There are other scales that are very narrow. So one is the mental fatigue scale, and it focuses just on the mental side of fatigue. In parentheses, it's concentration difficulties, memory problems. Your thinking is slower, your problem solving, decision making is slower as well. For HeadSet, we do assess through the application mental and emotional fatigue, but we've expanded a little bit and we use a little bit more of a multidimensional approach. We have the cognitive piece, just like the mental fatigue scale, but there is an emotional part as well that we look at. And then there's a mastery engagement part, right, that we also look at. And this final slide for me before I turn it over to Mark, these are some of the questions that we'll ask. These are only 3. We have 9 that we ask, and we ask them every week. So every Thursday in the application, we'll collect this data. So just the 3 that I mentioned that look at those 3, the cognitive, emotional, and engagement piece would be, this week I feel emotionally drained. We have it from 1 to 5. From 1, seldom. 5 is a larger endorsement, is always. Emotionally drained, 1 to 5. And then the engagement part or mastery. I did not enjoy participating in my sport. Then we reverse score this one, but we still use 1 to 5. We do it for every athlete weekly, so we can compare the individual week by week to see how they are doing. But then we also collect the group as a whole, and we can compare week by week. And this is important information for the athlete individually, because then we can intervene, right? So if they endorse these, we can come back with certain applied or skills or mental workouts for them to feel less of this the next time they are assessed, right? So let's turn it over to Mark here, and he has a specific example from one group from this year that he'll go a little bit deeper into.
Thanks, Pete. So I I'm gonna talk to you about a team we work with in the U.S. They're a Tier 1 junior hockey team. The athletes range from 16 to 20 years old. Some of the players are drafted by NHL teams. Every player on the team has a scholarship to a U.S. College. They train 4 days a week. They typically play Friday, Saturday, and Sunday is typically their recovery day. Their closest away game is a 3-hour bus ride, and their furthest is 12 hours. So I think it's important to kind of keep all of that in mind as we go through this, so that you understand kind of how they, who we're dealing with, and how they behave, and how we treat them because of those variables that I just mentioned. So before I get started, I think it's important to talk about, and I don't know if you can see my cursor moving or not, but if not, Pete, if you can just kind of go over data. I think in today's landscape of sport, I don't think we would find a coach, whether they were involved in, let's probably go down as young as U15 at an elite level, or a travel team, straight up to where we work with, and right into the pros, that data is not important. And even part of that, data has started to make decisions at every level for sports, whether it's how much we train, how little we train, the analytics on the technical side. It's starting to permeate. The problem, that we're seeing is, especially at the youth level, they want this collection of data, and, coaches or organizations are collecting this data. And so they move to the next slide where they have all this information. And this is where this kind of it breaks down, where the chain breaks down, in our opinion, because we've been at this for a good number of years, and we've worked with, we work with teams at high levels. They skip from information straight to impact. So they'll take one small variable or one small KPI and extrapolate out what that they think it means, because they've heard the word thrown around, and then they go straight to impact. So they'll try to take, we'll use a soccer team, for example, they'll try to take distance run in a game and extrapolate what that means as far as workload, and go straight to impact and try and make a decision, and forget all these other steps, which is, you need to understand what it means. You need to have an insight into what it means, and you need to have some wisdom or experience, because context is very important. And for me, context works into that experience, and then we can have an impact, right? So you need to understand how it all works for you to have an impact. So we'll take a player here, Jared Crespo. He's at Penn State right now, playing hockey, and he's good with us using his stuff. He was the captain of this team, played 18 to 20 minutes a game. And this was, one of the subjective questionnaires or dashboards that we have for this team. And it's not evenly weighted. So there's sleep duration, quality of sleep, ready to play, and energy level. And this is over a 7-day period is how we work it. And so his readiness score on this 7-day period was 3.3. And this is out of a 10. And so this obviously sets off a bunch of triggers on our side to start looking deeper, right? We don't just look at his readiness score. So we go into a bunch of data points. I bring this up because, you can go back, Pete,
okay,
or Jason. I bring this up because this is truly the holy grail of what every sports science, every performance department is trying to get to. What is readiness, and is my athlete ready to play? And so it's fluid and it's always moving. And I put this up to show you that we were just completely off on this. So while this showed us that, Jared, from what we were talking about and how we weighted it, wasn't ready to play, that weekend, he ended up scoring 4 goals, 3 assists, team won both games. So the correlation still isn't there. And I'll be the first one to say it, right? And we get into a lot of debates with people at either conferences or just talking to them, where they'll come out and say, hey, we got this readiness module and it's the holy grail. And I'll be the first one to say it's not. It's always moving. We're always, tweaking it. We're always trying to find what parts move into this readiness. And it was actually this dashboard and this chart where I picked up the phone and called Pete and said, I don't get it. Right. We thought we had this kind of tuned in, but there's got to be something else here, right, that he's telling us. Because if you go to the next slide, then, right, same period, this is now his objective data, right? And it's over the same time period, a little bit longer, but that period is included in there. And this is from a heart rate monitor we use with our athletes. First beat, we're measuring his movement, lotus trimp, which is training impulse, which takes in a whole bunch of metrics inside the body: breathing rate, heart rate variability. The HRV is heart rate variability and is standard deviation. And so we're not seeing too much. We do see a bit of a drop off here. He did get hurt here, so that's why we see that drop off, but nothing really that would say to us, hey, this is a physical issue, right? That his body is fit, and we're not seeing any variation inside there. So what is it? Why is there a disconnect between how he feels and he tells us he's feeling? And we always tell our athletes, you're never wrong. If you tell me you're feeling tired, I believe you. And I need to figure out why you're feeling tired. Is it physical or is it mental? And then we need to figure out what the next steps are to help you get out of that and get you feeling good. So if you go to the next slide, Pete, so EPOC is his extra oxygen consumption and the trimp per minute. And so this is over 2 games. So this is their Friday night game and then their Saturday game. And you can see we've got a decrease between Friday and Saturday on both EPOC and trimp. And this is early in the season. And we're going to see this decrease. We're going to see this fatigue setting in on the Saturday game. And so I was talking to Pete, we talk about it all the time, but we had this conversation again, right? The trick here is to try and get these numbers as close to the Friday night, right? We're trying to get this as even as we can so that their Saturday performance replicates their Friday performance. And this is at home. So this is easier for us to manage with this group of athletes, but it's still difficult, right? So I know, we always talk about athletes getting between 8 to 10 hours of sleep. So this game ends at about 10:30. By the time they do their post-game cool down, they shower. We have a meal for them. On the road, at home here, they would have had a protein shake or some type of protein before they left the locker room, and then they would have gone out to eat. This team is in the Midwest. Not many restaurants open past 11 o'clock. So, their nutrition isn't the greatest. They're getting home, probably getting into bed between 12 and 12:30. And then they're at the rink for an optional skate at 10 and a meeting at 11. So, we have some trouble getting them to that optimal sleep time because of the variables. We have zero chance of getting that when they're on the road, because most likely they're getting on the bus and we're traveling to the next city. So, we got to somehow trick the body into getting recovered so we don't have this fatigue that we see, right? So it's not just them telling us that we fatigue, we can physically see it, that they're not as strong on the Saturday as they were on the Friday. So what does that lead us to? Obviously there's kind of the game side as coaches that they're concerned about. We're going to not have the performance we want. From our side, our biggest concern becomes higher risk of injury. And why does that concern us? So we have some things here that we see, right? We see a decrease in power, decrease in strength, decrease in cognitive. We get an increase in their heart rate, an increase in their breathing rate. The last two doesn't allow them to recover as quickly in game as we would like. And so those lead to the top three, right? So the bottom two lead to why we see a decrease in power, decrease in strength, decrease in cognitive. All those things in a fast-moving sport like hockey can lead to the higher risk of injury, as well as, not getting the performance. So we need to, as a performance team, we need to work with the coaches to manage their training during the week. We need to break it into microcycles and macro cycles. Obviously, the start of the season, we can put a lot more load on them. And have that not be so concerned about that recovery, because it's early in the season and there are inherent breaks built into the season where we can then start decreasing our training load. This league tends to backload their schedule, so we do have a little bit more breaks in between games. Because once we turn the corner in January, what we have as an athlete is what we have as an athlete. And that's what I tell the coaches. It's going to be very hard for us to increase their aerobic or anaerobic conditioning. It's going to be very difficult for us to increase their strength, power as we go forward. From that point on, we're really just trying to manage the training load and make sure that the recovery is where we need it to be, right? So that we've got mobility built into their training sessions. We've got built-in recovery days built into their schedules. And for us, recovery isn't a day off. It just means we decrease the load on that particular day. And teams that work with us, and we're fortunate, is we're able to measure this objectively. We're not guessing on anything. So we're not saying to the coach, okay, well, let's try, we need you to work at a 50% training load, and just kind of guess at what that is, right? We've cataloged their practices or their drills, and teams that have been with us for a couple of years have a nice catalog of the drill bank, we call it, and they're able to go in there and pick the drills that will get the desired training load for that day. And we can manage that as we go through. And so if we're able to control that training load, we know that variable is under control. If we're seeing, like we saw with Jared and 3 or 4 slides ago, that leads us to that conversation we had with Peter. And we were able to take some of those HeadSet questions and build them into our wellness survey that our players get every morning. And we were able to start charting that. And we're now, that's become part of a regular question in our wellness surveys, that all our teams will be using starting this year. And we'll be able to start charting that and seeing how does that relate to their performance, and Mark, then how do we deal with that going forward?
Mark, just to jump in here, because this might be the perfect time to do this. We got a question that popped up, and you're just addressing it now. Do you ever have, with all the various assessments that you provide teams, times where you feel that there could be confusion with your athletes between what they might be stating as I'm ready or I'm not ready on a physical side and maybe a mental side? Do you ever feel that there's
absolutely, absolutely.
That's one of the questions that popped up here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we had that. Pete and I, we've been having the conversation internally for months until we, kind of came up with the questions to put into the survey, right? Because my team was looking at the numbers, and we've got flags, and Jared's a perfect example. We have flags where we look at it and then we're saying, okay, He's telling us he's tired, right? The metrics all tell us there's some type of fatigue. But then when we go look at his subjective data or objective data, sorry, and we look at his heart rate data and we look at all of that, there was a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've learned, especially at the level we work at, the athletes know exactly how they feel. They just may not be able to communicate it to us. And this generation of athletes really has trouble communicating. And so we needed to figure out a way to communicate on a level that they were comfortable communicating with us back. And so we've gone through a couple of iterations. I think we've nailed it down with the questions that we put in there. This team that we worked with was the first one we used it on, and we did it late in the season. So we have about 6 weeks worth of data from them. And it was very interesting and it was very telling. And there was a lot, as long as the players feel that the data is confidential, which it is with us, and it never gets back to the coaches, which it never does. From my side, it really started making a lot of sense on why this team struggled. Right. So we do see that. And that's what led us to this conversation with HeadSet to try and figure this out.
And another question mark that just popped up here is, when you do get notices from athletes that they are feeling tired, and you're trying to differentiate between, say, physical and mental fatigue, how is it that you're able to convey that message to coaches, and how is that received? Now, that's what one of our participants is asking.
Yeah, first off, all the data we measure with them, the red flags that we set up are all really based on their physical data, right? So, if we start seeing variations between 5 and 7% of their output, either way, it kind of sets off triggers, and we have various ones. And then we have their morning wellness questionnaire that we're able to tie into that, and injury and all that type of stuff. So we see it on a couple of different levels, and we can dig down, Jason, and we go back. Our first metric is 7 days, our next metric is 21 days, and then we go back 60 days. So we're looking for trends, right? And if you start seeing a trend, we can get to it. The second part of that question is really broken into two. So when we take on a new team, it's very, very difficult with coaches, right? So the first couple of months, we really say nothing to them, right? It's really the collection of data for us, and we let the coaches run their system the way they run it. And we want about 3 months worth of data. And the teams we work with, again, are typically training and playing 6 days a week. So we get a lot of data in that 3-month window. We then have a sit down with them and we walk through it, and we overlap games onto it, right? And we're able to show them what we're doing to the athlete and how we're doing it. It then becomes the next phase then, after we've had that, it becomes an education process, right? That we had a team, Jason, where they were using heart rate monitors, and the coaching staff was punishing kids if their heart rate wasn't in the red zone, so above 85% of their max heart rate at training, right? If it didn't hit that number, then there was a problem. And so we let it be, right? We have our process, we keep quiet, we sit in the background and we collect this data. And so, we had our first, and we've, the therapist would give us this information, the kids would relay this information back to us, but we bide our time. And then the first, the meeting we had with the coaching staff, I said to them, do you think everybody's resting heart rate starts at the same spot? So you and I sitting here right now, your resting heart rate is the same as mine. And he said, no. I said, okay. So then would it be fair to say that we may get to our max heart rate at different points because our resting heart rate doesn't start at the same spot? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you think a more fit athlete stays out of his max heart rate because of the way you organize your practice more than a player who's outside or not in great condition, or an athlete in practice that you're using more because he's on the power play and the penalty killing versus your fourth line player? And he agreed. And I said, then how can you punish a kid? So you're using it for the exact reason we don't want to use it. You're using, that's not what it was. That's not what this is set up for. It's set up to figure out why they're getting into those zones. Are you causing it as a coach, or is the athlete not able to handle the stresses you're putting on him? Or is there some underlying condition? You know, we worked with a soccer player that, you know, in simple training, Jason, his heart rate blew up, right? And we watched this and watched it and watched it. And finally, we pulled the athlete aside and said, hey, is there something you're not telling us? Because these numbers make no sense to us, right? Like your heart rate blows up. And he said, oh yeah, you know, I had a heart condition when I was a kid and my heart goes faster, but it's nothing to worry about. If you need a letter from my doctor, I can get you one. But then that makes a lot of sense to us, right? So the education, once we get past the education part, then we become partners with the coaching staff and the staff, right? And that works for everybody, right? That's the strength coach, the athletic therapist. The athletic therapist is usually the one who accepts us the quickest, because they know we're going to keep people out, or we're hopefully going to keep people out of his office with the non-contact injuries. The strength coach, you know, is on board. It's really the coaching staff that we got to educate. And once they see the value in it, then we become partners, and it's, you know, we're able to move forward with them.
Makes sense. Makes sense. That's great. So
that's, you know, that's kind of, you know, where we're at. And then, you know, on the how to help, this is where we educate the athletes. And what we tell with the athletes before the collegiate level is everything we're going to tell you is things we're trying that we would like you to try to help. And they may or may not work for you, but you need to figure out what works for you. So if an ice bath post-game works for one player and doesn't work for another, that doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it didn't work for you. For whatever reason, your body didn't react to that, or you didn't like it. Same with recovery boots, massage guns. Some athletes have trouble consuming, you know, a protein shake post-game. That's okay. We just need to figure out another way for you to get that protein in you post-game, so we can help and aid in that recovery process, so that when you go to college or you go to the NHL training camp, as we've got a bunch of our athletes at development camps now, you know exactly what you need to do to get you through that development camp, right? You're not guessing. You know, hey, the ice bath is not for me, but the recovery boots are, or vice versa, right? Or I need this type of shake, not this type of shake. I need to nap during the day, right? I need to, you know, my sleep isn't enough at night, so I need to take that 30-minute nap during the day to help me get through this session, right? So we also like to try and educate the athletes on what works for them, because what we don't like to see, or what we kind of shake our heads at, is when we see coaches or training staff trying a one-size-fits-all. And at an elite level, that doesn't work, right? Foam rolling and stretching bands may work for one athlete, but another kid may want to ride the bike, or he may want to go for a jog around the arena, or he may want to sit in the cold tub, or he may want to use the recovery boots. They need to find what works for them. Your job our job, I should say, isn't to put our biases on them. And that's what we tell staffs, right? You may like the foam roller. That's great. When you're done playing, you use the foam roller, right? But if Jason doesn't like using the foam roller, stop breaking his chops to use the foam roller. Let him use what works for him, that he has found through this trial and error, right? So there's many different ways to get that. And you know, we find that it's kind of this one size fits all, right? And we get a lot of grief from people on the different, when we'll use recovery boots or we'll use supplements, and we just tell those, come spend a weekend with us, right? And try to impart, your kind of rigid way of doing things, right? Where kids just came off a 12-hour bus ride, and they're having their meal at 11 o'clock at night, and they're getting 7 hours of sleep, if they're lucky, right? And then they're getting a morning skate in, and then they're getting a nap in, and we're trying to get them another meal in them, right? We have to trick the body into doing what we want it to do. And sometimes that requires, modalities and supplements, and napping. There's a bunch of different things. In a perfect world, Jay, we get 10 hours of sleep. Someone's there to cook us the perfect meal. And we have a perfect flush at the end of the game, and we don't play the next day, or we don't play for another week, right? That's not the reality we live in. And so we need to figure out different solutions to help them.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. This is great. Thanks for that.
So I'm good on my side with the slides, Pete.
Yeah, and just to add to it, I think for the how to help piece, and Mark, you nailed it. And especially the first two, that awareness and education piece is so important. And I put the acceptance piece there, because once you educate, and then everyone's talking a certain language that everyone understands, then the athlete feels a lot better about it, right? There's not the right or wrong, like you mentioned. It's just, you're going to have to recover. Here's what the recipe is for you or a group of people. And I think that's so important. Some additional parts in regards to the mental fatigue side. I think the expectations piece. And Jay, come in if you have some additional information from your clients. But I hear a lot when athletes I work with are mentally fatigued. They've almost put more pressure on themselves, right? I have to, and it just kind of layers those additional layers that weighs them down even more. So that self-talk piece, important. The meditation piece, I think, is also important. When you're feeling mentally fatigued and you're not getting the results based on performance, you just want to do more, and you're just spinning your wheels. So maybe trying to prioritize things differently. Maybe it's a meditation session in the morning. Maybe it's a walk in the morning, rather than going to all those other priorities that you need to undertake physically. I think that's so important. So maybe a change in practice and adding some additional mental skills, I think is helpful overall. One other one would be, especially this is for resilience, and Jay and I for HeadSet, we're big proponents of this, is that you have to think about the big picture. Because when your fatigue is there and setting in, and it's getting a little bit more and heavier, that remembering the purpose and big picture really helps to alleviate the short-term pieces.
Right.
And second to last, staying connected. Maybe it's with PRL and the staff. Maybe it is with the physical trainer. Maybe it is with the physical therapist, but it could be the mental performance consultant, which Jay and I will play with certain groups. It might be HeadSet, signing up to the app. Maybe it's family, friends, if you have good relationships with teammates, coaches. So staying connected, I think, is so important. If you have that culture where everyone is aware and educated, you're talking very similar language. And then lastly, and Mark was all over this, it's monitoring, but having reliable and valid assessments. Physically, mentally, again, it's that moving target for both. But if we have these good assessments that we're able to bring together, the physical, all these different pieces together to have impact, if we can add the cognitive piece or mental skills piece too, incredible. Maybe it is filling the gaps even that much more that we're doing. So I think Mark did a great job. And Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback on this last amazing point that we have here in the slide with monitoring the outcome of fatigue. One of the experiences that I have in working with a lot of military people here in San Diego, people who are everything from Navy, Marines to even special teams operations, something that is being done more and more now is trying to bring a sense of awareness to when that massive load of fatigue comes in, and being able to take an inventory of how we're feeling and how we're performing when that hits. And it's not an easy thing to do, but if over time we can practice our sense of awareness of when that heavy load of fatigue hits us, we can begin to start taking inventory as to what goes on with our system as a whole, whether that be mentally, physically, and be able to say to ourselves, okay, you know what, I'm hitting that point of exhaustion, or I'm hitting that point of, I need to stop and recharge, or I need to stop and engage something that's going to help me, because I've been here before and I've seen the red lights go off, and now I need to reassess. And we've seen this in an abundance of TV shows, movies, and whatnot, where they try to take, people who are attempting to become a Navy SEAL, or someone who's becoming a special element of the, say the special forces per se, or the military, and they're doing elite level training. So if you can incorporate some of that awareness, it could help a lot, being able to monitor where you're at and how you can respond better.
Before we wrap things up here, because we're going to do so now, are there any other questions just kind of thrown out to the entire group?
One question that did come up, and I think we've discussed this, is the feelings of that ready to play and feeling tired. And is there a difference between pushing over that ready to play mindset of saying, you know what, I need to push through this, or I need to relax and try to recoup? And how do you find confidence with doing that? And that was something, Mark, that came up when you were explaining your different slides of, my performance might be coming down because of the second game. How do I know when it's time to push through, rather than saying, okay, maybe this is the time where I need to kind of maybe take that nap or take a break? Is there any suggestions maybe?
Yeah, so, you work with the same type of athletes we do, right? So they're never going to pull themselves. That's why we have to, kind of monitor them and watch them. And again, we're always having conversations with them and chatting with them. We become a trusted confidant for a lot of the athletes, and they all have my mobile number. They don't want to reach out to our athlete support team and they have a question, or they want to come right to me, then we have that type of stuff. And so what we tell all our teams at the start of the year is, we start with the question, does anybody believe a game in October means as much as a game in February or March? And we all know the answer to that, right? And so I tell them then we need to behave that way. That if you have a tweak or there's something bothering you, then we need to address it and deal with it, because that game in October truly doesn't mean as much as when we need you, right? And our commitment to our teams is to give the coaching staff, 24, these teams carry 24 players, give you 24 players for the first game of the playoffs that you can look down the lineup and say, I've got 24 healthy athletes and I can put any 24 of them in the lineup and I expect them to perform, right? So that's the first part that we always try to get across to them, that know where you are in your season. And there is a time, right, Jay? Like, we tell our coaches, in the last couple of weeks of the season, we'll just, figuratively, we're turning the system off, because there's nothing I should be able to say to you at this point that will affect your performance. It's now the art of coaching more than the science of it, right? And at that point, yeah, players are going to have to push through and figure it out. But if we've done our job correctly, we've gotten them to that point, Jason, in a state where they're ready to go. But that's really dealing with, hey, maybe you need to sit out this game, right? You didn't, you got bruised up the night before, you got bruised up the week before, and your training wasn't really where it was supposed to be at, right? I'll give you an example. We work with a soccer team here. We had an athlete come back from a separated shoulder a month and a half earlier than he should. And he put in, I want to say it was about 2.5 weeks of training. And then the coach, without telling us, promised the kid playing time on the Sunday. And so, he went out and our guys were, they offer sideline support to this team, and his numbers just started blowing up everywhere after about 10 minutes, and went to the coach and said, you got to get this kid off the field. Like, he is not in any shape to play this game, and pulled him off. And that just kind of caused a whole bunch of a ruckus, because there's a youth club and these athletes are on a pay to play system. And the parents called a meeting for Wednesday or Thursday, I forget what it was, and I had to drive out to the field and just systematically go through it with him, right? Here's a kid who plays your position, here are you, right? So here's the distance covered, here's the sprint distance covered, and we look like we're we're kind of on, and now here's your heart rate, and here's your workload, and here's your trim. Like, you're not ready to play right now. And so why, as a family, why would you want to risk your child getting injured or hurt in meaningless games in June, right? Let's ease them back in. I said to the coach, stop promising people playing time. Let's ease you back in. Let's get you back to this baseline, because we worked with them last year. Here are your numbers from last year. Let's get you back to this baseline. And, now we're at the point where the kid is playing his, regular 75, 80 minutes in a game, and he's performing at a level that he wants to be. But we have to get in and protect players from themselves, and most times, protect players from the coaching staff, right? And this kind of win at all cost attitude. And the teams we work with understand that, and they're able to manage that workload. Now, as I said, we're not guessing on anything. We're not basing this strictly on subjective, right? We have the data points, and we have a lot of data points to go behind it, right? So when we make a call with a player or an athlete, we're able to back it up, and we feel comfortable in those decisions when we talk to a coach who ultimately has the final decision, Jay. Just because we say it doesn't mean it happens.
Right. No, this is great.
Right. So the two things I would leave you with is, if you're a coach and you're looking to measure this, because you're going to have to measure it, one, understand why you're doing it. Don't just do it because everybody else is doing it. You have to understand your why. And then the second part is, don't take one metric and base decisions off of one metric or two metrics. And definitely don't base it off of, a kid or an athlete training 2 or 3 times a week. You need a body of work before you can make a decision on where this athlete is at.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark, for today. I really appreciate all that you.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Pete. Take care, Jason.
You too. And just before we go, here's our information, contact information, but we're gonna put this into a recording, send it out to all the registrants. There's gonna be a giveaway for the people who registered through PRL. We'll send that in the email. Mark will put your email out there as well.
Perfect.
In that email to all the registrants.
Yeah, so if they have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're always open to working, and you don't even have to become a client. If you just have some questions, we're always willing to help you, guide you through this process.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for attending the questions. And once again, we'll send this out to everyone very, very soon. Thanks again, Mark. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.